Good morning, this is Lauren Gacious with NOAA's Office of Public Affairs. We'll give just another moment or two here for our media partners to join us before we start today's webinar. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the update to NOAA's 2021 Hurricane Season Outlook. This media briefing is being recorded, so if you do not wish to be recorded, please disconnect at this time. My name is Lauren Gacious, and I'm the media contact for today's Outlook update. At the conclusion of this briefing, you may reach me by email at lauren.gacious@noaa.gov or by phone at 202-740-8314. My contact information is also located on the media advisory for today's announcement. I'm joined today by Matthew Rosencrans, NOAA's lead hurricane season forecaster, to provide you with the science information behind our updated outlook for the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season. NOAA updates its outlook once every year as the peak months of the hurricane season, which are August through October, get underway. We'll begin today's media briefing with remarks from our speaker, and then we'll take questions from reporters. If you would like to ask a question during the question answer portion of this briefing, please click the hand icon in the GoToWebinar window next to your name. I'll then call upon each reporter that has virtually raised their hand, and your line will be unmuted. You may also use the questions tool in your GoToWebinar window to type a question for our speaker about today's hurricane outlook. Please be sure to state or type your full name and media affiliation when asking your question. With that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Matthew Rosencrans for his remarks.
Good morning. The Atlantic hurricane season officially extends from June through November, and we're now entering the peak months of the season. So far this year, 5 named storms have formed, one of which became a hurricane and was the earliest 5th named storm on record. NOAA's updated outlook for the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season indicates an above normal season is most likely, but with some minor changes from the May outlook. The updated outlook reflects the number of expected named storms will likely be in the range of 15 to 21. That range does include 7 to 10 possible hurricanes. Of those, 3 to 5 could become major hurricanes, which are hurricanes that reach category 3, 4, or 5. This updated outlook accounts for the 5 named storms, including 1 hurricane, that have already formed this season. Given the increase in the predicted number of named storms and hurricanes, there is now a 65% chance for an above normal season and a 25% chance for a near normal season, with a 10% chance of a below normal season. With the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season now well underway, there are several factors that we took into consideration when updating our analysis. While overall, we analyzed conditions supportive of our prediction that the season will be considered above average for the overall season activity, there are a mix of factors among the analyzed atmospheric and oceanic conditions. Last month, NOAA declared a La Nina watch, meaning there is a potential for La Nina conditions to develop during the 2021 hurricane season. La Nina occurs when there are cooler than average sea surface temperatures in the equatorial region of the Pacific Ocean and a corresponding atmospheric signal. La Nina is linked to weakening wind shear over the Caribbean and tropical Atlantic Ocean, which favors more and stronger Atlantic storms. This summer, we are observing some of those areas of reduced vertical wind shear across the Atlantic Basin. In addition to reduced wind shear, measurements do indicate a favorable West African monsoon. Both of those factors are signals for an above average seasonal activity. Now, in contrast to last year, sea surface temperatures are closer to average across the Atlantic main development region, which contributes to our analysis that this season, while likely above average, is not likely to be as active as last year. These conditions are all set against the backdrop of the ongoing warm phase of the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, which has been favoring more active hurricane season since 1995. August through October marks the peak months of the hurricane season, and while the tropics have been relatively slow over the past few weeks, NOAA forecasters do anticipate that a busy hurricane season remains ahead. Now is the time to be vigilant about your preparedness plans and potential actions. As we have seen in recent years, threats from hurricanes are not limited to damaging winds, but also dangerous storm surge and torrential rain and inland flooding. Residents in regions prone to inland flooding should join their coastal neighbors in staying tuned to the National Hurricane Center for the latest watches and warnings all season long. Also, visit FEMA's ready.gov for preparedness tips, and be sure to pay close attention to your local emergency managers during a storm for evacuation and safety information. Regardless of the predicted activity, it does only take one storm to have catastrophic impacts on lives and communities. Everyone should know their hurricane risk, have a plan, and be prepared for the upcoming core of the season. Thank you, and back to you, Lauren.
Thank you, Matt. We'll now take questions, specific questions about the outlook from our media partners that have joined us on the webinar. I'd like to remind everyone of the instructions that we gave at the top of the call. If you'd like to ask a question, please click the hand icon in the GoToWebinar window next to your name that appears to the right of your screen. I'll then call upon those reporters with a virtually raised hand. Once you are called on, your line will be unmuted. You may also use the questions tool in your GoToWebinar window to type a question for our speaker about today's outlook. Please be sure to state or type your full name and media affiliation when asking your question. I'd ask for your patience now while we moderate your questions, as it may take a few moments for those questions to come in and to organize them in the queue. Our first question comes from Seth Borenstein. Seth, your line is now.
Yes. Thank you so much. Matthew, I'm looking for a couple sort of quantification specifics. Can you tell us how warm the sea surface temperatures are in the development area compared to normal, compared to last year? And is there a way of quantifying the reduction in wind shear this year compared to normal, compared to last year? And finally, is this, are we looking at more of the Sahel, those strong Sahel storms are you forecasting, or are the ones that are sort of form that aren't Sahel storms and often less strong?
Sure. So the sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic are very much near normal. When we did our analysis about a week ago, they were 0.1 degrees Celsius below normal, which is very close to normal. Last year, they were about 0.2 above normal for about this week. That does change slightly on a week-to-week basis. As far as the storms that form out over the main development region, and as you refer to the Sahelian storms, they come from African easterly waves that move off the coast of Africa across the Atlantic. Some of the models have it forming a lot more storms out over the ocean. Some of them have them forming a little bit further to the west. That within the basin forecasting, that's still an unsettled part of the science as far as how good that is. So we really don't have an outlook that talks about whether it's more over the open ocean or closer to the Gulf of Mexico and closer to the Caribbean.
And to quantify wind shear change compared to previous years and normal?
I'd have to look that up and get back to that information.
Okay, thanks. If you can send it to Lauren and she can send it to me, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. Our next question comes from Mark Schlefstein. Mark, just a second here. I'll unmute your line. Mark, it looks like your line is self-muted.
To unmute and okay,
There we go.
I got it
Mark,
now.
we can hear you.
Sorry. Can y'all talk a little bit about the Saharan dust outbreaks this year and whether or not they really had any significant effect on reducing the chance of development this year so far, and idea of potential for obstruction of development in
So the Saharan air outbreaks, the Saharan air layer, it did have a little bit of an impact earlier this year, but we really did have a quiet period during a lot of July, which is typically when you have your largest Saharan air layer outbreaks. There was also in the Sahel region, there was an above normal amount of precipitation, and that can kind of reduce some of the Sahel outbreaks, Saharan air layer outbreaks, excuse me. So we're not forecasting that to have a major impact on the rest of the season.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes through in writing. It's from William Altoff. His question is, apologies, but can you update me on how this outlook compares to the earlier outlook this season?
Sure. The current outlook calls for 15 to 21 named storms. The May outlook called for 13 to 20 named storms. As for hurricanes, the current outlook is 7 to 10 hurricanes, and the prior outlook was 6 to 10 hurricanes. The number of major hurricanes has stayed the same from the May outlook to the August outlook.
Thank you. Just a reminder for our media partners, if you would like to ask a question, please use the hand raise icon next to your name, or you may type a question in the questions box. I see the next question comes from Kim Miller, Palm Beach Post.
Hi, so it seems like last year we were in the same situation with La Nina, with a watch being issued in July, and then I think it quickly turned on in August. What are your thoughts about the chances it'll do the same this year?
So right now the outlook calls for a 47% chance of La Nina development during the August, September, October period, with a greater than 50% chance during September, October, November. So given the current outlook, it does seem like it'd be a little bit later this year than last year.
Can I follow up?
Sure.
Okay, just so do you think that there's a chance if it does come later that we could see another extended hurricane season? You know, last year it went into mid-August. Would La Nina's delay have any impact on that?
That was a factor the team took into consideration and debated. If a La Nina does develop later in the season, could we see another active month of November? And that did play a role in kind of keeping our numbers maybe 1 or 2 storms higher.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Looks like our next question here is one that is typed. Comes from Elliot Weld with the Florida Keys Free Press. Did the quiet period in the last few weeks have an impact on the updated number of projected storms for the remainder of the season?
The recent quiet period didn't actually have an impact, being that we had such a fast start to the season and made it to the earliest 5th named storm. The quiet period, so normally during June and July, we only have two named storms. We've had 5 this year, so we're already ahead of the pace. So the quiet period kind of just brought us a little bit closer to normal.
Great, thank you. Our next question comes from Derek Van Dam. Derek, your line should now be open. You just need to undo your self-mute. There we go. Derek, are you there? All right, Derek, let's see if we can address that. Perhaps we'll fix that one and come back to you just since we can't hear you. Our next question comes from Eben Brown. Eben, your line should now be open.
Great. Thank you so much for doing this. My question, sir, is, I guess if a lot of people, we love the meteorology aspect of this, but for a lot of people, hurricanes represent an emergency management situation more than a science situation. But I want for you to talk about how, with all of these predicted storms, really only one can ruin someone's day, and we don't really know where that one will go, because the science behind any kind of landfall predictions that are done is really, well, it's not really science.
Sure. The forecast for the actual track of a storm are best made about 5 to 7 days out. And that's really comes from the National Hurricane Center. So taking the time to prepare now for any potential impacts can lessen the actualized impacts much later.
Right. Well, I meant like there are other outfits that put out season-wide predictions as to how many would make landfall, and obviously we can't really figure that out.
Yeah, NOAA does not issue a landfall forecast. That's something we're still looking into.
Great. All right. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to try to come back over to Derek. Hang on just a second. Derek,
Hi.
there you
Yeah,
go.
I'm here. Sorry about that. So, yeah, Matthew, I was just curious, are you guys at NOAA concerned about any kind of near coast kind of last minute development this particular season?
I mean, near coast and kind of rapid intensification just before landfall, that's something the Hurricane Center is always worried about with every storm. But as far as season-wide forecast of will they form closer to the coast or further out in the ocean, that's not really a forecast. There's not really skill in that kind of forecast. We're about 2 weeks out.
And then do you consider the MJO in your updated seasonal forecasts, just kind of as we're running into phase 1 and 2, it seems?
We do take into account what we call more broadly tropical intraseasonal oscillations, one specifically being the Madden-Julian oscillation, or MJO. And that kind of has led to this quiet period and to an active period coming up. But as far as season-wide, you tend to go through 1 or 2 full cycles of those. So season-wide, they don't have as great of an impact as kind of the 1 or 2 week periods.
Thank you, Derek. Our next question is one that comes in writing. From Jenny Staltovich. Can you please talk about the string of busy Atlantic hurricane seasons we're seeing and why that's occurring?
Sure. If this season becomes an active season, forecast verifies, this will be the 6th consecutive active season. And that's really just in the background of we're in a high activity era. We've been there since 1995. The Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, as analyzed with the sea surface temperatures over the Northern Atlantic, has been in a warm phase. So those temperatures have generally been above average since 1995. So any month-to-month average of the sea surface temperature in Atlantic, they've all been positive. And that really just sets the stage for active seasons to happen much more frequently than inactive seasons.
Thank you. Next question comes from John Boyer with the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Do we see any trends with sea surface temperatures near the U.S. coastline, Gulf or East Coast, that would contribute to storms that intensify right up to landfall?
There are some above normal sea surface temperatures up off the northeast coast, but a lot of the temperatures near the southeast coast and the Gulf of Mexico have either been near normal. There's been some patches of below normal earlier in the summer, but that can change on a week-to-week basis, and you can get small periods of warm water, and if the storm can move over that small area of warm water, it can rapidly intensify. That's especially prevalent in the Gulf of Mexico with something called the loop current.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Laura Martinez. Her question is, does the Sahara dust that is happening right now have to do with no storms forming right now? And is Saharan dust keeping them away?
So the Saharan air that's out there now, it's probably contributing to lower amounts of storms right now. And if anything did come off, it might have a harder time forming. We've also seen an impact from the question asked us earlier on the Madden-Julian oscillation. That's a tropical feature that moves through every 3 to 4 weeks. That was in an unfavorable position for Atlantic development for a couple of weeks. It's forecast to move to a more favorable position for development. So there's a kind of a number of factors that led to the recent quiet period.
Great, thank you. I have one more written question here. Just a reminder for our media partners, if you would like to ask a question, you may do so using the hand raise icon or typing your question in the questions box. Our next question comes from Carrie Duncan with WLOX Biloxi in Mississippi. Is there an area which looks more prone to activity? Does it look like there is another ridge over the Atlantic that will set up? Also, last year, the season went into November we went into November for the whole season. On the Mississippi Gulf Coast, we dealt with several near misses and then Zeta on October 28th, and we're still dealing with damage and cleanup. Does it look probable for more strong late season storms?
So as far as forecasting how many storms are close to the coast versus how many are out over the ocean, that's not really something that this outlook covers, because that's would kind of be more of a landfall forecast, and we don't issue a landfall forecast. The extending the season is a possibility, especially if we get a La Nina that does develop and has that atmospheric response from the Pacific that translates that response to the Atlantic. We could end up with some more late season storms. So taking the time to prepare now and then having those supplies on hand for the duration of the season is a smart move.
Thank you. I see a follow-up question here from Seth Borenstein. Seth, if you unmute your line, you should now be able to ask your question. Seth, are you there? All right, we'll come back around to that one. I also have a follow-up question from Kim Miller here with the Palm Beach Post. What analog years are you looking at this season?
I don't have them off the top of my head, but I can dig them up and get to you.
Okay, thanks. Let's see here. This one says, Colorado State said that Elsa might be a harbinger since it formed the Atlantic tropics so early in the season, and they pointed out that the 6 other years when such an early season hurricane formed in that region, including last year, happened to be hyperactive. Assuming that is true, why would that be?
So yes, every time that we have had a hurricane form in the Eastern Caribbean in June or July, it has resulted in an active season. When you can get a storm to form that early in the season, it does show that there's generally favorable conditions for an overall active season. It's just kind of one of the first tells for that year.
Great, thank you. Coming back to Seth. Seth, you should now be able to unmute your line.
Oh, yes, yeah, finally. Thank you. Sorry about that. Matthew, what is the chance of exceeding the alphabet and going to the new backup names, exceeding the letters, the names, and going past Wanda? And is there a percent chance that we, 2%, 1%, whatever, that we match the record last year in terms of named storms? Have you calculated that chance?
No, I haven't calculated the chance of actually getting to 30 named storms. The current list has 21 named storms on it, and our forecast is for 15 to 21 named storms. And our outlooks are given within a plus minus 1 standard deviation, so about 70%. So that would imply that there's a 15% chance of exceeding the 21 named storms.
Thank you.
All right. That looks like it might be our last question. Let me just take a look here to make sure that there aren't any other reporters who have a hand raised. And I do not see any additional questions in the questions box at this time. Oh, here comes a couple. Anthony Carpino asks from WRDW in Augusta, Georgia, could you talk about the impacts that climate change has played in hurricane season trends and overall trends?
Sure. So some of the major impacts from climate change are the increased intensity of storms. More storms are able to reach Category 4 and 5 status. So that's one impact. Another impact is that when storms do form and then they make landfall, they are able to create more rainfall. And so they have about 3% more rainfall on any given storm. So that's a couple more inches in every storm usually. The wind speeds are also on average about 10% higher. And that's really because we have more of those, Category 4 and 5s. And the other impact is that, so when you take a storm and you have the climate change induced sea level rise, that does increase your threat for coastal flooding. And that's really prevalent and really important for a place like Savannah, Georgia.
Great, thank you. And I see one quick follow-up here from Kim Miller. For clarification, she asks, are you saying that there's a 15% chance of exceeding the 21 named storms, or is that, alternately a 15% chance of it being outside of the scope of the outlook itself?
So our forecasts are given with a 70% range. So there's a 30% chance of being outside of above or below, which means only a 15% chance of it being above the 21 named storms.
Great, thank you. All right, let's see here. If there are any additional questions that come in at this time, I do not see any additional hand raises. All right. So with that, I would like to thank Matt Rosencrans from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center for his expertise in delivering our updated seasonal outlook and providing us with this briefing today. A recording of today's remarks will be made available online at the bottom of our press release on noaa.gov later this afternoon. And finally, if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to contact me, Lauren Gatius, at 202-740-8314. Again, 202-740-8314. That concludes today's webinar. We thank you so much for joining us.